Andrew. It is what day?
It is May the 7th, Friday. That was the week. You've accused me off screen of being miserable. Do I look miserable to you?
I think you're just serious, and I mistake it for being miserable because I'm so sensitive and in need of being loved that I'm worried you don't love me.
Yeah. Well, you're too nice, Keith, for me. I only like nasty. Anyway, we have some nice and nasty news this week, depending whether you're in China or America. Keith, you're telling us in our editorial this week, we're speaking to an American audience that we, and I'm speaking as we, speaking from San Francisco in California, we should not underestimate China. I have to admit that's news to me. I never thought anyone in America was underestimating China. If in some ways, perhaps people are overestimating it. But explain the editorial this week.
So it's triggered by an article from the Nikkei Asia, which is a fantastic newspaper, an organization, written by two Taiwanese Chinese who go into a massive amount of detail about what China is doing to build its own capability in producing semiconductors, which is very much far ahead of where I thought it was. I thought China was dependent on the US for semiconductors. This article disabused me of that. And then it made me realize that China has done a pretty decent job of compensating for the broken supply chain between itself and America, and is doing what China's always done over the last few decades, which is make itself independent of that need. That's the entire. When I've spent a lot of time in China, and when you engage with the elite in China,
when you say a lot of time, how much?
I was in China pretty much constantly, many times a year between 1997 and 2002.
But that was a different China, wasn't it?
It was pretty much today's China in its emergent phase. And so I was doing deals with the government for technology, and I became aware that the biggest preoccupation was independence. That is to say, not be dependent in the case that they got cut off from the rest of the world. And it feels as if what's happened recently is they did get cut off from the rest of the world, and they're trying to become independent, where that doesn't matter. The editorial makes the point that when you have a very large home market with a very large middle class and a domestic manufacturing base, you can become the biggest economy on earth without exporting.
Say that word again, Keith, because you say it in perfect Yorkshire accent. Class.
Lad.
Of course, the origins of the Industrial Revolution was Britain in their class system, which Marx famously wrote about in the 19th century. Then the British were seemingly almost outdone by the Germans. They fought 2 world wars over that, and the Americans seized the mantle. Are you suggesting that the Chinese are next in line? I mean, you're certainly not the first or the last person to make that argument.
Yeah, I mean, I studied social and economic history, economics, and politics. So and I focused on the 20th century. So that transition between America and Britain, I can talk at great length about the impact of that, for example, in Iran with the oil, and the transitions between the first Shah, the Mossadegh regime, the second Shah, and so on. What happens is proxy wars are fought all over the world between emerging and declining powers. And that is a constant fact. And today, that is a proxy war between China and America, China being the rising power, America being, at least relatively speaking, in decline.
Well, our sponsor, of course, is Diet Coke. They pay us billions of dollars to be on this show. Where's the Diet Coke in China, Keith? They're just manufacturing Diet Coke in China. Do they have anything original? Isn't this the standard American response, that the Chinese, like the Japanese before them, are just imitators, that there's no real innovation there?
Well, if you go to Shanghai, you would wish that American cities would imitate China. China's very, very far ahead on infrastructure, buildings, rail transport. I mean, pretty
Everything really, except maybe freedom.
except economic freedom. Adam Smith's version of freedom is pretty good at. It's not very good at John Locke's version of freedom.
And let's talk specifically about tech. Are the Chinese really now the leaders when it comes to blockchain, financial applications, AI, and even and even next generation computing platforms? Uh,
Well, I'd say America and the UK are still very far ahead in what you could think of as deep tech. China is a follower. The primary universities in China are excellent, but they're not inventors. They are followers. And now here in America, and I hear this a lot in Silicon Valley, people say that because of that, China can never really eclipse America. But that's failing to understand the way economics works. The way economics works is it's all about volume and the flows of money. China could be really quite primitive in innovating in deep tech and still be the most valuable place on earth, just on car production alone. Just on
yeah.
car production.
What
Now,
about the two technologies that seem to be the most revolutionary and profound on the horizon are quantum and CRISPR? What do you know about China's achievements in those areas?
well, in CRISPR, they're completely up to speed. In
I mean,
fact,
they were the ones who pioneered the birth, right, of the
yeah, and also the COVID vaccine just now. Uh,
yeah.
there was a big Chinese component to that in terms of its invention. China is a scientifically literate society, not unlike, say, Germany.
Well,
Uh,
Keith, do you remember last week I introduced you to a game called baseball? Do you remember that?
I do remember that eight
And we
innings, right?
remember that you thought there were 8 innings, but there are actually 9. So,
Yeah.
using the baseball metaphor for this question, which may be the wrong one, given it's a question about American relevance, where are we in the baseball game between America and China?
Oh, we're very early, probably first or second innings.
Because there's always the argument they haven't even come on the pitch yet. They haven't even invented the game. But you were already in the first inning.
First or second innings, and you know, there isn't a book betting on the winner because it's inevitable that China will be the
It
winner.
is inevitable. And what does that China victory look like? America becomes like Britain. Everyone talks about class.
I think, well, let's define the meaning of Britain in that sentence. Britain actually did a really good job of managing transition whilst retaining a lot. The City of London today,
Yeah.
commodity trading, all of that was retained. And so Britain is still, the second largest military power in. Certainly, it's the biggest in Europe. It might not be the second in the world, but I think it might even be the second in the world. Um, so Britain managed its replacement. America, if it's really, really smart, will do best to embrace inevitability whilst managing its pace and its role within it.
So it's the marathon, managing its pace, Keith. That allows us to move on to one of your other segments in the newsletter today. Automation and capitalism, because of course the future of capitalism is AI, our smart machines. What is the news on that front this week?
Well, this is a really, really good article of all places on the Next Web.
What do you mean,
And
of all places? Those guys are friends of mine.
also mine. I actually introduced them to Michael Arrington back in the day. I
Were
remember
you the guy who opened the door when they showed up in their white suits?
I had coffee with them in Town and Country Village in Palo Alto prior to that, and I encouraged them to go with their white suits and wake him up.
Didn't do them any good, did it? Although I think they sold NextWeb to the FT.
Oh, did they?
Well, their
Pearson.
event is certainly more fun than the TechCrunch events.
So this is the article, how automate. It's by Tristan Green. How automation could turn capitalism into socialism, and the point it makes is a point I kind of grapple with, which is, let's assume that capitalism is really good at replacing work and humans with software. Um, what does the world look like after that? And I always point out there's two alternatives. The first is that we retain private ownership and a small number of very wealthy people own
Mm.
everything, or society takes over from private companies now that everything's automated, and literally routes resources to everyone.
But this was the you tried to sneak this argument in about 3 or 4 weeks ago with the Paul Graham guy. What's his name?
Yeah, Paul Graham.
No, not Paul Graham. The guy who works for
Oh, Sam Altman. Sam Altman.
yeah. So
Yeah,
why
this
is
is
this
very
different
light.
from Sam Altman's argument that it's socialism is somehow inevitable?
So I think I don't think it's inevitable. I think barbarism could equally be possible.
Well, some people might say barbarism and capitalism are the same thing.
They can become so. They can certainly become so. It's all about democracy, right? It's if you lose democracy because there's a small number of owners of automated production who get to lord it over everybody else, that is not a pleasant future. But Tristan Green and Sam Altman are kind of in the same league. You're right. That's a good association that you made there. And this article is probably should be added to that Sam Altman one on a reading list. I think it is not plausible what he says without conflict, because I've never seen a capitalist give up control to society, voluntarily.
Say class again. Is that class struggle, Keith?
It's class struggle.
And I think perhaps we would probably need to change the name of this show from not "That Was the Week," but "That Was the Decade" or "That Was the Century" to really address this issue. It's certainly not gonna materialize or get fixed or get solved. Or the game isn't gonna end or begin in a week.
No.
One thing that did play out or is beginning to play out this week is Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg is looking as miserable as possible. I think he's probably the only person in the world, Keith, more miserable than me, isn't he?
Yeah, and he's rich. So
you're saying I'm poor? Well, I think we're all poor. Even you're poor compared to Zuckerberg.
Absolutely.
So why, before we come on to Facebook's dirty work, why does he always look so miserable? Why isn't he having fun like Bezos?
I think it's because his enthusiasm for what he was doing has now been completely challenged by the stress of having to justify it left and right, globally, to governments. To
who would you rather be married to, Bezos, Zuckerberg, or Gates?
Come on, I can't possibly find anything positive in any of them as a marriage partner.
Well, you would divorce them all and get half their wealth. So what is Facebook's dirty war, Keith, this week? What's going on?
So the oversight board...
Not war, that was a Freudian error. Dirty work, not war. I apologize.
Dirty work. Yeah, so everyone's going to be familiar with this, I suspect. But back in the day when Trump was banned on Facebook, they agreed to create an oversight board to, quote, tell them what to do. And
which was it a genuine everything with Facebook? I don't trust them with anything. Was it a spam board?
Here's what it was, Andrew.
We could call it a Potemkin board.
This is what it was. Can you see my picture?
Yeah, hot potato.
It's a hot potato. They passed this hot potato of Trump to this oversight board,
which is made up of what? It's run by what's his name?
They're fairly okay people. It's not really to do with the people, but quite rightly, and I support
Ariana Huffington on it. She's usually running these sorts of things.
Right. And quite rightly, what they did is they said, thank you for the hot potato. Here it is right back at you. And they passed it back and said, you've got 6 months to decide whether to reinstate Trump or not. Our opinion is you can't ban somebody forever.
Yeah, I have to admit, I don't like admitting this publicly, but I'm entirely on your camp, in your camp on this stuff. The idea of banning Trump is not only ludicrous, I think it's politically very, very dangerous. It's creating an appalling precedent.
I agree.
Twitter's done it even more explicitly. There's no reason to ban this guy. I mean, he's an irrelevance now anyway.
Yeah, I think he was always a powerful idiot, and most people know he's an idiot. And insofar as they don't, the problem isn't Trump. The problem is them and their life. It's back to the China thing. The life of the average Americans who supported Trump had been heavily impacted by the decline of US manufacturing, and they were not happy people. And
Say
Trump,
China like Trump says China. Do the Baldwin China.
I
You have to
can't
say it
do
through your
it.
nose.
You,
China.
China.
Yeah, I don't get it. And one other question, Keith. I'm very disappointed. Why is there nothing in That Was the Week this week about the Gates divorce? That's the big story of the week.
It is a big story. I agree. Generally speaking, I try to steer away from tabloid journalism, Andrew.
Well, that seems to me much more interesting than China.
My wife has been preoccupied with it. She's read everything, especially about Anne Winblad, who is falsely accused of being Gates's girlfriend.
Well, since we're on the subject now, what's your guess of the reason? Is it her or him? Seems to be her.
I
She
think it's
doesn't want to put up with him anymore.
I, th- I think it's impossible to understand someone else's relationship, but I would say that my observation is he's spent a lot of time on science and hanging out with scientists in order to solve problems. She's spent a lot of time on causes and philanthropy. And my guess is they have pretty much two very different lives and have just grown apart.
Well, it's another reason why perhaps in the long run, Marc Andreessen is going to go down as a bigger player in tech than Gates. He's been sidelined, and Andreessen's back in the news again, or his firm's back in the news again. They're raising what $1 billion crypto fund, Keith.
They are indeed. This is their third crypto fund. I nearly said fund.
Fund fund for
It's
class struggle.
exactly. It's their third one. The previous one was many times bigger than the first, and this is bigger than the middle one. And it's in the context of Coinbase having just gone public
Yeah.
and then doubling down in their belief that crypto is going to become more and more mainstream, which, by the way, in the newsletter, if you just quickly scroll through the headlines, Goldman Sachs is now trading cryptocurrency for its high net worth individuals. eBay is now exploring crypto payments for eBay buyers and sellers. Institutional managers now hold $14 billion worth of Ethereum. And Filecoin has built a decentralized storage service for NFTs. So more and more every week, there's fundamental news that indicates that crypto is becoming embedded in our lives.
And in all seriousness, where's China in all this? Is this
China,
still an America-centric event?
No, well, China is a few things. One is it's the center of blockchain mining. So China's a mining leader in the world. Secondly, China is an innovator in the use of blockchain for its own currency. So China already has a digital renminbi that is now being used on mobile smartphones as a payment mechanism. So it's kind of very far ahead in digitizing
And
currency.
didn't you have a piece this week about the Economist saying that here comes the national currencies,
Yeah,
the national
correct.
cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, I didn't actually put it in the newsletter, but that was talked about this week for Europe and the US as well. I mean, ultimately, all currencies are going to be digital. It's just logical that they would be. Why would you have pieces of paper when you don't need them? But digital currency is not the same thing as blockchain and crypto. They're alternative stores of value and means of exchange. So then competition opens up between non-governmental currencies and governmental ones. the big story of the next 50 years is going to be the decline of governments as valid publishers of currency.
We've had this before. That's your wishful thinking. That was the half century, but that was the week. What about the connection between crypto becoming increasingly real? I know Union Square made billions out of this, Andreessen made billions, and venture capital performance. Is venture capital performance increasingly being driven by crypto?
I think that's a kind of another first innings example. In that, yes, somewhat, but not in gross numbers. Venture capital performance is still being driven by SaaS, the cloud, AI, enterprise.
And dating apps.
Dating apps are certainly part of it. But this is my job, and when I'm not doing that as the week, I run a couple of algorithms. One's called GP Rank and the other's called Company Rank.
Yeah.
That score VCs. And what Fred Wilson published this week is Dan Malvin wrote a piece of research that showed that more than half of VC funds do very well, which is a little known fact. People used to think it was only the top 10%. And Wilson kind of amplified that and said half of all VCs beat the stock market. And from the point of view of whether you should invest in the stock market or VC funds, that's a pretty big statement, facing off to pension funds and corporate and various endowments and family offices. So it's basically saying venture capital is a good asset class to invest in, better than you thought. And now, at the same time, there's a negative article this week, which is this one, saying that inside rounds have hit 30 billion. Now, an inside round is when a company doesn't get new funds from new investors, it gets them from its existing investors. That's usually a bad sign. It usually means that they can't get money anywhere else. But I think in this case, it's a good sign. It's greed driven. Like, why should I share this outcome with anyone else? Let me put more money in myself. So this VC returns plus inside rounds, I think, are both positive signals for what's going on in venture.
Well, one thing I've learned from being around this for a while is it's always a boom until it's a bust. Your startup of the week this week could both fuel, I think, theorists of both the boom and the coming bust, because it's focused on one of the more ludicrous aspects of the crypto space.
So this is a 276-year-old fine arts auction house that should never qualify to be called Startup of the Week, but does because it's just agreed to accept Bitcoin in payment for a Banksy piece that it is auctioning. And the Banksy piece is a real, I don't believe it's an NFT. I think it's
not an NFT. It's just a straight.
It's a piece of art. It's a painting, actually, called Love is in the Air. So this is Sotheby's, accepting that Bitcoin is as valid as pounds or dollars as payment for a piece of art. And because they earn a commission, they're making a decision.
Is that really, though, in all seriousness, is that really particularly radical? I mean, they get paid in crypto and then they just sell it. What's the big deal?
Well, the big deal is they never would have accepted to do that, before 2021, I suspect. So they're a late follower, let's call it. So I'm just using.
Can't they just quite literally take the Bitcoin and sell it, and then there's not even any risk?
Yeah, they can sell it in two ways. They can create a wallet and sell it openly through their wallet into a service like Coinbase, or they can use what are known as over the counter services, where they do a private deal with a Bitcoin buyer, usually at a discount from the trading price, and get dollars.
What's the thinking? I mean, why wouldn't if you own Bitcoin, you want to buy something from Sotheby's, just sell the Bitcoin and pay in cash? What's the big? I don't get that.
Well, the big thing is that you couldn't. No one would have thought about doing that until very recently, right? Why wouldn't you just take the cash?
Yeah. So is a suggestion that Sotheby's might be speculating in Bitcoin And
I
that they will
I
get
wouldn't
paid in Bitcoin and then we'll keep it and trade on it or something?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, it was announced this week. Both Square and Tesla had their earnings calls, and both of them, Square made 3.85 billion on Bitcoin this quarter, and Tesla, who put some of its dollar-based treasury into Bitcoin,
Yeah.
made sold some of it at a $270 million profit.
Right. Well, you remember, Keith, that in the late 90s, people were saying that in San Francisco, all the taxi drivers, there were taxis back then, this was pre Uber, the taxi drivers would pick you up and say, should we buy Amazon or Yahoo? And we knew then that the market was about to crash. Today, with Sotheby's speculating in Bitcoin, we're on the verge of another crash. Is that fair?
No, but it's a good question. I think we're in the first or second innings of the ultimate
Hmm.
scale of crypto and
Well,
Bitcoin.
enough innings, Keith. I'm bored with baseball. There is one sport that I know you know a lot about. It lasts 90 minutes. It has two halves, and it is the subject of our tweet of the week.
Yes, this here's the tweet. It's Mac the Knife, who I have no idea who that is. He's obviously a Manchester United fan, and
Yeah.
in the aftermath,
All Manchester United fans have names like Mac the Knife.
anyway, in the aftermath of last weekend, when fans protested at the stadium and got the game between Manchester United and Liverpool called off, uh, in the day before the next game, he said, "I assume we're letting tonight's match go ahead?" Question mark, which is obviously a joke, but is indicative of this fan-based dialogue about the teams and the leagues needing to be more under the control of the fans, which has become a huge conversation. I know you're going to have a point of view about this.
Well, I have lots of points of view, but in terms of that was the week, which is a tech show, what does this teach us about the future of tech, the behavior of Manchester United fans at Old Trafford?
Um, I think it's I went on a clubhouse this week with Steve Gilmore and his wife Tina, and this guy called Doug came on the clubhouse, and we gave him the microphone, and he said, "I'm a Manchester lad." So I said, "City or United?" And he said, "United." So I said, "What do you think's going on?" And he said, "I think the fans are going to end up buying the team, and they might do it by raising money through a crypto token called Manchester United."
Or SPACs? What about SPACs?
Well, he likes a SPAC as well. He said, "Crypto token to raise 6 billion from 800 million fans, buy the club and list it through a SPAC so that the fans are all shareholders." And I thought,
Yeah,
if this
I mean, but
catches on, it gets
for
interesting.
amusement, because to see all the Mac the Knives of the world lose their money, because that would be a recipe for disaster. But do you think that this increasing fan agitation and involvement and activism, invading the pitch, demanding to be involved in the in corporate policy, is it a cause or an effect of social media? Are these people increasingly just taking it for granted that they should be involved in the management of their local football club because they're on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and they just think they're empowered?
I think that might be a macro level impact of social media, but I think there's a micro level catalyst. The micro level catalyst is all of the owners deciding to leave the Champions League and go into a league with no relegation or promotion, thus separating those teams from competition, like the NFL is. Like, you just can't be kicked out unless you go bust, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, I think that to wrap up, we started with China, we ended with English football. Things will clearly be changing once Chinese multi-billionaires or sports ownership companies buy Liverpool and Manchester United from their American owners, Manchester City from their Middle Eastern owners, Chelsea from their Russian owners, and my team from their Edgeware owners.
You know what I'd like to do with you, Andrew, is we should do a separate show about the economics of the Premier League and because
and we'll have to invite Daniel Levy on.
if you'll come, yeah, that would be good.
I
But I think the key insight is all in researching how much money TV takes out of the game. In other words, it pays too little compared to the advertising revenue it makes, and how streaming could get that money to flow into the game instead of to the TV channels. To me, that's the more interesting conversation than this Super League stuff.
You may be right. Although at the moment, I don't want to think about football because my team is so bad. Anyway, that was the week of May 7th, the week that China took over the world and America became a footnote, at least according perhaps to Keith Tier. We will be back again. No, he's shaking his head. I perhaps exaggerated that slightly.
First innings, Andrew. First innings.
First innings. We'll be back again in our second innings for May, at least, on May 14th to talk about That Was the Week. Have a good week, Keith. I'll see you next week.
Bye.